This kind of strategy was also used in World War I. Cities, which replaced fortress walls with high-rise buildings, controlled important nodes of railways and roads, making it impossible for the enemy to ignore them and bypass them. The topic was chosen by a vote among the subscribers. If you want me to make a video on your topic, subscribe to the channel. I regularly conduct polls to select topics for future videos. Write a comment, and if your topic is really great, I will make a video on it even without a vote. Until next time, In the Middle Ages, the number of roads between settlements was minimal, and they passed through villages and castles. If you in 2345 or army need food and supplies that are being brought to you by supply caravans, you would be risking everything if you bypassed the castle. The defenders of the castle would likely attack your unprotected supply wagons, and your provisions would fall into their hands. Thirdly, if you started a war or had it declared upon you, even if you launched an offensive and captured several castles, but things didn't go as planned, you could still secure your position in the captured castles. These castles would now serve as your defense. Your enemy simply could not bypass them because of the first two reasons. This was the case during the 100 Years' War. The strategic initiative shifted hands, and only previously captured or held castles prevented the sides from suffering complete defeat. Equally harsh measures were taken against residents of nearby villages attempting to deliver supplies to the besieged. In 1161, during the siege of Milan, Frederick Barbarossa ordered the hands of 25 citizens of Piacenza to be cut off for trying to supply the enemies with provisions. But what if Frederick Barbarossa had simply bypassed the castle? Unfortunately, that wouldn't have worked. First, the value of castles in areas often subjected to raids by various armies was immense. Castles served as a central point of refuge in times of danger. People from surrounding villages would bring their belongings to the castle and stay there, burning everything they couldn't take with them. Furthermore, most castles contained not just the nobility, but also a vast amount of supplies, weapons, and cannons. Simply bypassing a castle meant abandoning all of that. Therefore, the owners of a castle, preparing for a siege, often resorted to extreme measures, expelling all peasants who could not contribute to the defense. The garrison of castles was small, and it was impossible to feed an entire army during a siege. The best season for a siege was summer because it rained less than in spring or autumn. In winter, the castle's inhabitants could melt snow for water. By then, crops had not yet ripened, and the old supplies were running out. The attackers tried to deprive the castle of its water supply, for example, by building a dam on the river. In extreme cases, biological weapons were used. Corpses were thrown into the water, which could trigger outbreaks of epidemics in the surrounding area. The inhabitants of the castle who were captured by the enemy, maimed, or released would return home and become involuntary freeloaders. The castle might not accept them, but if they were wives or children of the besieged, human compassion often prevailed. For example, the main 65-meter tower of the Q7 castle in Snes had walls up to 7 meters thick. As I mentioned, castles and fortresses were intended for defense, so their construction excluded even the slightest weaknesses or imperfections. The gates were tightly locked, and the drawbridge was the only way in. In a word, these structures were completely isolated from the outside world. Through the battlements, the defenders of the castle would drop stones, molten tar, or lead onto the heads of attackers. To capture a castle, it was necessary to isolate it, meaning cutting off all food supplies. That's why attacking armies were usually much larger than the defending ones. The issue of provisions was the most painful one. A person can survive without food for about a month, but without water, only for a few days. However, it is important to consider their decreased combat effectiveness during starvation. September 3, 1669, the defenders of the city fired at the enemy for the last time, using up all their supplies. The next day, they raised the white flag. This was the last day of the siege of Kandy, which lasted 21 years, from 1648 to 1669. It was the longest siege in history. The Ottoman losses during the siege amounted to 240 men, while the losses of the besieged are unknown. The question arises, why did the armies and their commanders make such sacrifices to capture the castle rather than simply bypassing it? Before the invention of effective artillery, castles were built in all countries and at all times for defensive purposes. As a rule, they were constructed on elevated ground or open areas near rivers. This allowed for excellent panoramic views of the surrounding territory. To slow down the enemy's advance, the approaches to the castle were fortified. Common practices included deep moats with water, several outer rings, and strong main walls.